Hi, I am Misa Ramirez, and this is Books on the House. Today we're chatting with Allison Brennan, New York Times bestselling author. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled to have you here and thrilled to feature your book, your newest release, Original Sin. Is that correct?
Yep, that's it, number 13.
Number 13. That's just mind-boggling. 13 novels, and how long have you been writing?
Well, my first book was published in January of 2006. So what's that, 4 years?
13
Yeah.
books in 4 years. Wow.
Yeah. Boy, when you put it that way, it seems like a lot.
It is a lot. Plus, you have a few novellas thrown in, right? And
Yeah, I have a novella and 2 short stories, and I have another short story coming out in October on Halloween with Horror Writers Association.
oh, so kind of crossing the genres from romantic suspense to thrillers to classic horror.
It's horror light. It's supposed to be a humorous horror. It's called Bloodlight 2, and it's there's supposed to be like slightly humorous but horror stories. Mine is about a demon who tricks a prostitute into giving her body for life. So it has some, hopefully, so I'm not really funny in my books, but I hope this has a little bit of a humorous bent to it.
Wow. Very interesting. I think your mind is just amazing. I'd love to live in your mind for just a day. Might scare me.
I don't know. I make you insane.
I know. So can you tell us about your new series, which is The Seven Deadly Sins?
Yeah, Original Sin is the first book of the Seven Deadly Sins series. It's about the demon Envy. It basically is a coven of teenage witches, or a coven of witches, but a bunch of them are teenagers, are released the Seven Deadly Sins from hell. They're led by, the primary villain is my heroine's mother, and she is searching for the Book of Knowledge, basically the Tree of Life. It's something that for thousands of years the occult has been searching for in order to gain immortality and wisdom. And I read a bunch of books on black magic and the occult and tried to base everything on a sort of I hate to say a Judeo-Christian foundation, but it's really a Judeo-Christian foundation in terms of what our beliefs about demons and hell are. But I also read a lot of occult and then also like Wiccan type books to try to get an understanding of, well, okay, what do good witches think? How do they think, what do they think that they're doing, and how do they view sort of their world? And then what do bad witches think? And
so you just put that idea on the back burner while you wrote, your last 12 books?
Pretty much. I had the idea, but I also had finished, I started writing it back in 2003. So it was before I even sold. But I had The Prey was done. And so I was trying to find an agent for The Prey. And when we sold that, I sent her the idea for the Seven Deadly Sins series. And it wasn't even called the Seven Deadly Sins series then. It was called The Coven. And she said, well, this is really good. Let's put it on the back burner until we establish ourselves in, romantic suspense. And so we ended up selling it after I wrote 9 books and we sold it. But were contracted for 3 more romantic suspense then. So we did the 12. And I think that was good. I really did want to build myself. And I am writing romantic suspense too. In fact, that's what I'm working on right now.
So what are you working on, and when is that coming out?
We don't have the exact date. It's either November or December of this year. They haven't said it yet. They're still juggling schedules, but it's Lucy Kincaid's first book.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm really loving, I like going back and forth. It really keeps me fresh. And why? Why do you want to release the Seven Deadly Sins from hell? Well, I figure just the fact that being immortal is, fear of death is one of probably the greatest fears of humans anyway. So what if you fear death so much that you would do anything to avoid it? And that's really where my villain Fiona is. She does not want to die. She does not want to grow old. And it's an obsession with her. So she's willing to do anything.
So is that kind of how you started the premise of the book, with that question, and then from there developed the premise of the coven? No.
I didn't figure that out until I got to the end of the... Actually, you want to know how I figured out Fiona's greatest fear? Was last year at National, Donald Moss gave this workshop called Fire in Fiction, and I ended up buying his book. And he asked a question: "Is what is your what does your villain want the most? What does your characters want the most? And I really realized that Fiona was just this over-the-top evil person, and she had no reason to be. And I said, okay, well, what is she looking for? Well, she's looking for the, tree of knowledge, tree of life, in the book of knowledge. And why is she looking for it? Because she wants to be immortal. Well, why does she want to be immortal? Well, because she doesn't want to die. She's scared of it. And then all of a sudden I figured it out. I was halfway done with the book. I mean, I was done with the first draft of the book. I hadn't edited it yet. And I was like, all of a sudden, all these light bulbs were going off. But the book actually started, you might remember this because we were in a critique group where I wrote this scene.
I do remember this.
You remember this?
Yes.
Where a teenager was running through the woods and she was dressed in this gown and she was terrified. And I started that and realized, oh, this is a good beginning to a book.
How is it different weaving in the supernatural elements? I loved, we have a question and answer that you responded to that's on our website now. And I loved your take on supernatural versus paranormal, which I hadn't really thought about, that distinction before. So is it fun writing the supernatural elements? And I know you're a big Supernatural fan, the TV show with the Winchester boys.
Oh, yeah.
As am I.
So in mine, I try to take the real world as somebody's trying to gain immortality. And I also use forensics, and I have a cop in my book, and she's investigating the murder or the death. She doesn't know if it's murder or not, the death of a teenager on the cliffs where there's all this occult paraphernalia. So she's trying to figure out, she's going through it in a very logical police investigative way. And my bad guys are, but there's also these supernatural elements where there's demons released. Mm-hmm. And so it was completely different. It was a lot of fun. But I got to go do something, where I could take my forensics background and blend it in with the supernatural. So I just have to change the premise. Demons are real and go from there. Okay, the world is exactly as it is today. And then I'm taking the idea that witches or some witches can, have magical powers. And they do, but it's all done with spells and rituals, pretty much as witches practice today. And so the occult is that's where they're getting all their sources. But my premise is also all magic comes from the underworld. That even if you have good intentions and you mean well, it's still coming from the dark side. So I have a witch who, a teenager who's a Wiccan, who's really just a really nice girl, and she's just trying to, to sort of save the earth and to be a better person. And she's using all these spells in order to gain this. But as she uses more spells to gain, an understanding of the earth around her, she's actually creating more problems, essentially. So, but she's not a bad person. She's just doing all these things. And then it's sort of like, snowballs. And so the more she does, the deeper in she gets. And so she's one of the teenagers that, in this coven. So it's all involved the high school. One of the teachers is one of the bad witches, and it's hard.
Yeah. One of the things that we're featuring on Books on the House is your novella, What You Can't See. And can you tell us a little bit about that? It's related to the series, is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of a prequel. It stands by itself, but it's like it's how Anthony and Skye, who are secondary hero and heroine, how they meet. And it's sort of about the Rafe, who's my hero of the series, is in a coma for the novella. And it's sort of kind of what happened. It's not the release of the 7 Deadly Sins, but it's kind of what led up to the release of the 7 Deadly Sins. So it doesn't have to be read. It's completely separate. It stands alone. It's its own complete story. But it's also Rafe's backstory. So now it was able to, because you can't dump a bunch of backstory into a full-length book. Right. And there is a lot of backstory because where all these people came from is how they all got together at the beginning of this book. And so I do try to weave it through the first book of, Original Sin as well, because it's important. But if I would gone back even further, then it wouldn't have been the beginning of the story.
So it stands alone, but can really enhance Original Sin and the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wrote it by itself, and I wasn't actually even thinking that it was going to be part of the series. I kind of wrote it just so I could understand Rafe's backstory. I never intended to set Original Sin in Santa Luisa, which is my fictional town, but it just kind of worked out that way.
Thank you again so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.